Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and welcome to our Friday morning episode. This morning we're going to be crossing to the US, State of Cybersecurity, and this is part two with ISACA annual research, and joined by Jenai Marinkovic, who is in California near Sacramento, and Jonathan Brandt, who's in Maryland, and John is one of the lead researchers on this particular report. And this was last May. We spoke to Jenai and John with part one, and quite successful with that as well. So if you're an ISACA member, and I better disclose that I am an ISACA member, hopefully you are tuning in and take great interest in this. But obviously anyone in the cybersecurity domain will take interest. And let me bring on Jenai Marinkovic and John Brandt. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, Chris.
Great.
Hey, Chris.
John, I think we had some slight technical issues again then, so one of them was going to disappear, but we're all good. Thank you so much for joining us again, and it's your evening. Jenai and John, maybe to John, you were the lead researcher on this report, and this is part two. So maybe just talk us through the report and your role as the lead researcher on these reports, and just for the audience, rather than just talking, we've got some figures out of that report as well. So you will learn some of the key trends that we're seeing internationally with ISACA. I think you've got, how many members with ISACA now? 250,000 or 120,000? Can't remember.
I think last number, I think 140,000. It's a large number. I know that much.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so around 140,000. Yeah, go, John. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Hey, thanks for having us back on your show. So annually, ISACA conducts its annual State of Cybersecurity research. Survey normally opens Q4, so normally middle of November into December, and typically based on the size of the survey, we write 2 reports. So as you had stated, we were back on your show back in May. Part 1 is normally focused on workforce. Part 2 is normally takes the operational trend. This year, you'll see some trending in there, and we continue to refine the survey year after year to kind of get a little bit more granular, especially as we see this convergence, right, between the IT, the ops, and the security side. So my role here at ISACA, my title is Information Security Professional Practices Lead. It's a whole lot of words. Basically means that I'm the staff content lead for things InfoSec, and work cross-functionally across the global headquarters, serving members across the globe.
Well, you've got, as I mentioned last time, you've got more credentials and certifications. So hopefully you can get some CPE points out of this particular session as well. You're going to need them. And Jenai, maybe your role here, you're kind of a bit of an evangelist and spokesperson for ISACA globally as well.
Yes. Thank you for having us. Appreciate to be here. So I am the Virtual Chief Technology and Security Officer with Cybersecurity, but I'm also on the Emerging Trends and the Emerging Technology team with ISACA. And what I do is, after Jonathan and his team is completed with the report, we analyze it and then determine, what are some of the implications to people who operate security organizations, so Chief Information Security Officers and so forth, and ultimately make decisions based on the information that's presented.
Yep. Now, last time we spoke to a little bit more on sort of workforce, cybersecurity workforce and the like. This one, I think we're going to be looking more around sort of enterprise trends, attack types, and what their budgets are as well, and some of the trends there. And just to put it in maybe in Australian, New Zealand context for our local audience, 41% of respondents in Australia and New Zealand indicate that their enterprises are getting attacked more, and the 6 most frequent types of attacks are social engineering, APTs, denial of service, third party, unpatched systems, and insufficient logging and monitoring. Maybe, John, the context of this globally, where some of those key trends are, and what were the real pullouts from this particular report for you as you put part 2 together?
So, the reports sometimes get challenging. And to Jenai's, comment, right? At the end of the day, we put the data out, and the regional crosscuts are really the interesting part of it, right? Because this is not one size fits all. Our reporting largely is a global snapshot. However, where there is a story, we love to tell the story at the regional level. Largely speaking, the I guess the big thing was that attacks were declining for 3 years, and then they bounced back. And on the surface, I think anybody that is in the security space, or even just corporate America across the globe, recognizes that when things change or abnormal, as was the pandemic, which was anything but, it's an opportunity, and bad actors typically take advantage of that. And this was no different here. So we did see this uptick. However, when you start to dig into like the specifics of it, there wasn't a lot of change in the subcomponents, if you will, at the detail level. So it is notable that attacks have increased, and by this point, our survey data had concluded 10 months ago, and all of your viewers, as well as anybody in the space that's following trending, it, things have just continued. And if anything, they have, based on industry reporting, things just continue to spin out of control.
The I did find this interesting in terms of we were almost back to the 2018 period, which is the blue, and then down here at the 2020. I was a bit surprised by the number of attacks for 2021. I beg your pardon, 2020, and we've bounced back in 2021. Yeah, what was some of your observations around this? Because the same number of attacks, we've taken a big step backwards, right? Is this predominantly pandemic induced, do you think?
I think it's partially pandemic induced. If you look at the number of people that, as a result of the pandemic, had to pivot into cloud, and in ways that they were ill prepared to do. And because a lot, especially around things like logging and monitoring, it's a lot more difficult to do that, especially across things like software as a service platforms. So that pivot into cloud meant that a lot of companies were ill prepared for it, which means that you would see, an uptick in the type of attacks there. The other is that, we're seeing a monetization of these attacks in a way that we really hadn't seen before. And so when you look at the type of attacks, APT, denial of service, ransomware, they're all ones that are highly linked to monetized attacks. So capitalizing on the pivot to cloud, the need to figure out how you can monetize this, and then the targeting of supply chain, I think, is why you're seeing the numbers that you're seeing.
So the social engineering aspect that we've seen is an indicator of phishing attacks. Is that what would be the indicator there, John? Is that the intention there of the social engineering?
That's a large component of it, right? Social engineering is a little bit broader than it. Could be phishing, could be smishing. I think largely, that is, even though we do add context around definitions and what in the surveys, the average respondent, I think that's what their go-to is. And I do, it comes as no surprise, email-based attacks like that, especially when, to Jenai's point, right, we pivoted to this, distributed workforce model. Not only were enterprises scrambling, you had employees scrambling too. And whereas we don't have the specific detail, there's been enough disparate industry reporting to speak to the fact that organizations had to procure, mobile equipment in the way of like laptops, right? Because there was still a lot of companies that were desktop based, and they didn't necessarily send them out. So during that time of transition, it is reasonable and likely very plausible that if you did have a SaaS base, like an Office 365 type thing, then people were using a lot of home devices, and maybe their guard just was a little lower.
Yep. We do have seen an increase here, about 35% more attacks and about 24. So that's still about 60% thereabouts. Only 5% reporting fewer and 16% not answering. Just a quick comment, Andrew, I think I'll be going for the Dogs. So here in Australia, it's the AFL Grand Final tomorrow. And I'll be back in the Dogs. So thanks, mate. Now, that seems to be the way that these are done, John. This is an overall across everywhere. So this isn't broken down by region. So this is overall. How many respondents did you have to this particular report?
Oh boy, that's a really
All right,
good
I'll leave that.
question.
I'll put you on notice on that one then. I'm sure it's in the methodology, and I'll
Yeah.
have a look as well. There's a couple of easy pull-outs of here. How confident are you overall in your organisation's cybersecurity team's ability to detect and respond to cyber threats? That's not a big call to action. I'm completely confident. I'm one of those who never ticks 10 or the highest anyway. I always sort of go an 8 out of 10 if I'm scoring something. But majority are pretty much very confident and somewhat confident. Jenai, maybe what's your observations across the sectors that you deal with on how confident organisations are on their teams?
So I might be giving a little bit of a contrarian view of this number because I believe it's biased. And the reason is that if we actually go back to the part 1 report, and we asked questions like, how would you describe current staffing of your security organization? And 61% said somewhat or significantly understaffed. The majority of unfilled positions were at the individual contributor or the practitioner level. The second largest gap were in security controls, and 60% believed that security budgets were either significantly or somewhat underfunded. And when you start looking at the numbers of how long it takes to contain a breach, it's anywhere from like a low of 75 to high of 212 days. So I struggle with us believing that we're fairly confident that we're going to be picking up attacks when we are understaffed, underfunded, undertrained, and the containment times are upwards of almost a year. So I think there might be a little bit of bias in those numbers.
Go, John.
So if Chris, if I would like to piggyback on that, and I think one of the issues is you can't protect what you don't know. Right. And what, and that really speaks to knowing what you have, understanding, legitimate traffic flow, what's normal. So, and obviously I think that's the rub there. To your earlier point, though, you had asked a question about respondents, and I think it's kind of pertinent here is even though we have some of these, there are discrepancies, and we like to call those out, and we did that with the part 1 report, but the respondents with this survey was 3,659. That was a 44% increase from the year before. What I think is even more a better number with that is that the number of people that were selecting prefer not to answer decreased across this report.
Yeah.
And to me, there's some value in that there, right? Is that organizations seem to be a little bit more willing to speak to their challenges, or maybe there's a little bit more cross-organizational dialogue that maybe Jenai can speak to, because obviously I think when we look at the pandemic and everything, organizations at large had to take different approaches and do things a little bit differently, and that forces conversation, right, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Jacinda, we'll come to that question in a second. I'll bring it up in a moment because I think we will get to it. And to be fair, I'll bring it up to be fair. So from research, what are the top 1 or 2 things you'd recommend to assist organisations with low governance and high exposure, e.g. scientific research labs at universities, governments of developing countries? We'll come to that because I think we do we'll keep that in mind and touch on it when we come to some of what organisations are actually doing and what's motivating them to implement controls as well. This one here, what impact, if any, do you feel cybersecurity training and awareness programs have had on overall employee cybersecurity awareness? That's not too bad in terms of the the strong positive impact and some positive impact. So it's always been a bit of a bugbear, cybersecurity awareness and security awareness generally for corporates and enterprise. But it looks like this is becoming a bit more standard for organisations now to have a cybersecurity awareness program. It's been, in fact, anyone in the GRC role, and also, you know, some people have that role of cybersecurity awareness officer as well. Jenai, what's your trends that you've seen across the market as well in regards to awareness training?
Oh, absolutely. An increased hyper focus on awareness training, just security training across the board, and linking, you know, some of the breach statistics back to all of the breakages in the controls that ultimately led to it, and then ultimately training on those as well. I think the other thing is that you're seeing more and more security awareness training content being embedded into different security platforms. You know, so you're able to roll out things like phishing training. You're able to roll out just-in-time training. So I've been infected, and I receive a message letting me know what I did that led to that infection. So, you know, I think you have that. And, you know, quite frankly, defense and forensics teams are getting throttled, right? You know, with all of the breaches. So you're seeing more of a focus of those organizations participating in the awareness training. So, and I think that you've seen more and more training period because of the pandemic. You know, so I think the security awareness training is also coming on the backs of that.
John, your thoughts on cybersecurity awareness training, and any, I don't know, any innovation in training that you've seen or would recommend, or you think it's on the right track?
I think anywhere. So, you know, anything in the security place where there's an opportunity, there's plenty of market participants. So obviously, we don't endorse any single vendor over another. There are obviously there's some ones out there that seem to be doing a better one than others. I think the ones that are work on or anchored in the psychology of people, those are something that you want to look into. I think it's also worth noting, though, that something that is just this continued theme that I've been hearing from through other outlets such as yourself, right, is this conversation of the need for more education as opposed to awareness. And I think that that speaks to the quality into the level of penetration that you're going to get within your organizations, you know, bang for the buck. One of the things that kind of it doesn't bother me, it concerns me, is that the pandemic impacted a lot of companies, you know, largely indiscriminately. Like you're going to hardly find too many that wasn't impacted in their bottom line in some regard. Historically, based on my, you know, my master's research and whatnot in workforce, typically when budgets start taking a hit, the training budgets are amongst the first to go. So I would be a little nervous. So I think that it's a valid question, and something that I plan on asking in the next year's report is we want to understand where that funding for the training is coming from, because I think if it's an operational cost, I think it's largely safe. If it's an organizational training cost, it could be at risk.
But training should be aligned to the risk profile as well. So I think you're right in terms of the interest of how budgets are allocated. If it's an overall training budget, it's easy to cut that down. And then you've got, so where I'm heading with that is if the training is controlled by a training department, they might not be aligned to the cybersecurity risk profile, and therefore they might just cut off cybersecurity training because it's a low-hanging fruit. Whereas if it's controlled by the CISO, they know that, hang on, we're not going to be cutting off safety and security related training. It might be other related training as well, because it has impacts on the business. So yeah, I go Jenai.
I would also like to give a shout out to all of the auditors and compliance people out there, because I've definitely, especially when it comes to certification audits, I've seen the auditors dive into the quality and the maturity of the security program, and not just did everybody click through, get the training, and so forth. So I'm definitely seeing an uptick in that.
Well, this might come to Jacina's question, and did the research also? She's got one other one there, which is a good one. Did your research identify any trends by sector? And I don't think I did see on this one by sector necessarily. But Jacinda, I don't know if you saw the interview the other day from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. That did break down by sector. And we're seeing professional services, government and healthcare sector being most targeted. This one here is the motivation, I suppose. What are your top concerns related to a cyber attack on your organisation? And reputation seems to be the big one, and then data breaches resulting in customer physical or financial harm. And John and Jenai, we had a good case study out of that Australian Cybersecurity Centre cyber threat report. Was a hedge fund got hit by a BEC fraud. Business email compromise, lost 8.7 million, but they got the money back, or most of the money back, but it was actually their key client pulled out as a result of that breach, and they went into receivership, so put them out of business. So It wasn't the loss of money, it was the loss of reputation, that they had been breached by a simple, well, not simple, but BEC fraud is avoidable, and put them out. So reputation still seems to be the big one there. John, maybe who in the business is driving that kind of motivation on reputation? Who do you think in the business is the main one? Is that the board and the CEO?
Well, I think that's probably plausible. I think that the only reason it's probably topping data breaches right now is perhaps the industries that are a little less regulated. Right, because if we look, I'm sure probably later, later in the report when we had talked about cyber maturity and why it is they do something or what it was a compliance mechanism which was driving that. So, at the end of the day, reputation, no doubt, right? At the end, find me any corporate executives that's not going to care about their corporate reputation and their business standing, like.
But it's ironic that it's almost double, well, maybe significantly higher than the impact on supply chain and business disruption. It's like,
right?
No, we don't want to have the business disrupted or our supply chains compromised, but no, it's actually our reputation we worry about. It's all...
and I think it's also fair too is and this is one of those questions that could be potentially a little biased, right? It depends on who's responding, and how well informed you are. So, some of these statistics, it's like any research, right? The data is only as good as not only the questions but the respondents. So there is that. So I think the fact that we see some betterments out there. However, I think Jenai would probably back me up on this, is that penalties for non-compliance of what are largely like just best practice in doing some of the all that low-hanging fruit. Pick the small stuff, the easy stuff, and at least do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Because if not, then I think that this is some of this misalignment that we see.
This one here, which, if any, of the following does your IT teams manage or oversee? And I do have some trends coming through on sort of cloud adoption and the like. This one was another one that jumped out to me in terms of the number of on-prem infrastructure still out there. Given the trends that we're seeing towards cloud, they're really dealing with hybrid environments at the moment. Maybe that's increasing complexity on systems to manage and configurations. Hence, there's going to be some vulnerability in there. The US perspective that you've got over there, you still find majority on-prem in terms of maybe your own client bases and who you're talking to?
Certainly see still organizations with a component of on-prem. Like as an example, a lot of companies still haven't yet brought their VPNs to the cloud. So while I may not have a physical space, you'll still see components of the network architecture still be in the cloud. But yeah, all of my clients, sans just a couple, are hybrid right now.
And we had the Microsoft Exchange servers vulnerability as well. So most of that was still targeting on-prem, and the vulnerabilities are there, although we've still just had the Microsoft Azure vulnerabilities coming out with the Omigod vulnerabilities as well. So They're doomed to fail either way, and Microsoft is certainly getting hit hard recently. The physical security components there, I mentioned we've just got an interview with Genetech. That's something I'm definitely hearing more and more is the physical and cyber security. The physical teams are talking more about cyber. The cyber teams are finding that they have to engage with the physical teams, and then you're getting the rise of the CSO, the Chief Security Officer, who is across all of it. Any particular trend, and that maybe take us back to the workforce chats that we had in part one, but again, the way that teams are structured and the way that they approach security, do you find is converging faster, or if not almost there completely, for physical and cyber security?
It's not something that we picked up on the report. In our cybersecurity fundamentals study guide, that program, we actually speak a little bit to the physical security versus information security aspect because it is important there, and there's some statistics that we had put in there. I think to me, this is a good thing. The reality is that the organizational size is going to drive how rigid you have these separations, right? Um, and obviously, I think that the risk increases the smaller the organization, and like because you just might think you might bring in a vendor, hey, we're going to put some badge readers in, or biometric, whatever the case is, some physical access component, and it's basically becomes a fire and forget. You install it, you walk away, and you don't think about, especially if you don't really have a formalized security function. Your IT people aren't really putting a lot of emphasis on the fact because they're putting out the business fires, right? Just keeping the business applications alive.
Well, I've got to be honest, Hikvision also was a lead on our newsletter this week. So Hikvision cameras have had a critical vulnerability as well this week. So if you've got Hikvision cameras on your network, you need to be looking at their latest CVE, and that came out as an alert also from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. So again, if it's a IT IoT device, it's likely to be connected somewhere. Do you believe that your board of directors, so we're down to our last few here, do you believe that your board of directors has adequately prioritised organisational security? And this was an interesting one. Always we have this discussion on where the security role and the security function sits in an organisation, and it looks like the CISO is out in front over the top of the CIO. Jenai, you're nodding there. You're quite an advocate for the CISO role.
Absolutely, 100%. No, these numbers make sense. If you're in cybersecurity, if you're a chief security officer, a couple of things. Obviously, you're advocating for security and risk, and more than likely, you're going to be able to do a better job than a CIO is going to. Just because you understand risk and you understand threats in a different way. At the end of the day, chief security officers are governance experts. And a CIO's responsibility is broader than that. So the fact that we're seeing boards of directors that are more prioritizing it, if you have a CISO, makes sense. The other thing is that boards of directors are becoming very savvy as well. So they're driving a lot of these conversations because a board understands natively risk.
Okay, and my other emails, I think I've captured that email there by mistake. And this one here, the spending on security technology and cloud migration. The first one, sorry, figure 9 grabbed my attention initially. So about 51% no change, but a 34% increase as a result of the pandemic. And then security, 36% yes, increased in spending specifically on new security technology initiatives during the pandemic. So it's pretty well evenly spread. Almost the Pareto principle there, the sort of 40, what is that, 20, no, that's 2080, sorry, in terms of the yes and the no. But yeah, split over there. So not too much change there, John, from what your observations were?
No, obviously we were opportunistic with some COVID related questions just to kind of as a barometer based on some other reports that I follow. I think that this slide speaks to the fact that largely speaking, security teams were pretty well prepared, what we won't know is until this year, right? Keep in mind that, this report was, for 2020. So we'll see whether this pattern continues, in how we ask that question. It was interesting to your point is, the one about whether it drove cloud migration was the one that I was a little surprised on. When it came to spending, let's just be real, like spend plans were out in front at that point in time. I think, the pandemic hit different regions hard at different periods. I don't think every region was not every region was as responsive, at the beginning of 2020. So the spending didn't really surprise me a whole heck of a lot, but the cloud migration surely did. I think that just speaks to what Jenai had talked about of this hybrid, um, the hybrid model that's out there, right?
Yeah.
I think people are trying to get away from on-prem. I think I would use this opportunity to highlight the risk, though, because the internet was never designed to be centralized. So I think, and it's something I'm sure that every security executive out there is probably cringing on, is the more you consolidate into these cloud type things. And let's just be honest, right? There's every component of it, there's just some major players that surface to the top. And same thing with MSPs and MSSPs. The more that people are levitating towards any of those things, now all of a sudden, if they get attacked, the bang for your buck is a lot greater, because going after one spot has a trickle down, and you're getting a lot of clients. So there is that risk there.
Yep. And Jenai, any thoughts here?
So in terms of the spend, that totally makes sense. And the reason is that security organizations are dealing with an inordinate amount of technical debt, and the architecture is a little bit over-architected anyways. And so CISOs, because the budgets are starting to, even out, have to manage spend and simplify the architectures, to be quite honest. So the spend makes sense to me. The cloud migration, I think there's a lot embedded in that phrase, cloud migration. You're definitely looking at more and more non-IT groups using cloud platforms for collaboration for their side, and those costs do come under IT. So pivot to software as a service platforms is certainly increasing. So I think maybe when we're thinking about cloud migration, maybe it's like taking on-prem servers and moving them into cloud environments, or more tied to digital transformation initiatives. Maybe that's how they perceived cloud migration. But without a doubt, more companies are pivoting to cloud.
Most will be using some sort of SaaS platforms across different business units as well. And technically, that's business in the cloud when you think about it. And does your organization conduct a cyber risk assessment? And I suppose maybe going back to Jacinta's question of what are the top one or two things you'd recommend to assist organizations with low governance and high exposure, you would start with a cyber risk assessment or a cybersecurity audit, I suppose. But the motivation here, why do they do it, is the compliance and regulatory compliance. So the big stick does work. I've always kind of said so. We've avoided cybersecurity legislation here in Australia, but now they're bringing it in for critical infrastructure and the like, and suddenly you've got the board's attention as well. Regulatory compliance is the main driver worldwide, would you suggest? Either of you? Rather than preventing data loss?
Yeah, I think so, right? And at the end of the day, I think most people in the space, they see that there's more regulations, there's more that are coming about. So this isn't really surprising. And this question was actually asked in the context of cyber maturity.
Yeah.
So in that, so they kind of help frame that, as well as to why are you even doing this. So it is, and I think, so truth be told, right, I got some humility here. We probably could have did a little bit better job refining the response options here. there was actually more of a discovery question than anything else. So we took the opportunity, for your viewers, right? ISACA, we acquired CMMI a few years back, and we continue to kind of do some work in that space. So this was an opportunistic question. I think, right, and there's work to be had here, because I cringe, like, to me, like, there's several other reasons why you should be doing the risk assessment, right? And it kind of points back to the previous slide where we talk about, or reputation and data loss, whatever your crown jewels are. Whatever it is that why you exist as a company, like, to me, that should be first and foremost. What we do know is that, largely speaking, risk assessments are not happening frequent enough.
Yeah.
We need
It's
to
a
do a
point of
much
time
better
as
job.
well. Yeah, that's right. It's a point in time.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things we see a lot more is in terms of that cybersecurity maturity model, one, it's a journey. So you're working towards a sort of a maturity level and a posture, I suppose. But it's always day by day, isn't it, in terms of what that risk is, and making sure that you've got not just your prevention, your detection, but also your response ready as well, because you're never going to be 100%, and things change. Maybe just to finish off, and thanks to Jacinta for these questions, is what are the one or two things you'd recommend to assist organisations with that low governance and high exposure? Often, as she mentions, research labs, governments of developing countries, not-for-profits is another area, small business. What are some of the things that the one or two things that they really should be doing from a hygiene or posture perspective on cybersecurity? Any sort of those one or two top things that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a very pragmatic approach. Now I'll turn it over to Jenai, who's got a lot of, obviously industry experience. She's seen this day in, day out. At the end of the day, I think those low governance, high exposure areas, one of the things that organizations struggle with in general, we give too much access. So first and foremost, like, I cannot stress enough, principle of least privilege and need to know. At the end of the day, like, if you can't do anything else, go through and revisit every access everybody has. And the simple things, because one department doesn't need access to another department's data as a rule of thumb. Like, though, you're minimizing the impact, right? Especially with these lateral attacks. Once a bad actor gets a foothold and they move across the organization, those are the easy things that you can do.
Yeah, I think the other one is things like the BEC fraud are still the big trends. If there's a financial hit that you're going to have, it's going to be something through like a business email compromise, or some sort of anything to do with your money and your finance is one, and then also your data, things like your customer. What's really important for the business and your customer data. Things like and the other one, if you're here in Australia, you can reach out to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and sort of join your sort of national cybersecurity group, or follow them on Twitter, and you start to get those alerts. And once you do, you realize, well, there's a lot of vulnerabilities out there, and there's a lot of sort of critical ones and high alerts and the like, and you start to educate yourself. Jenai, anything there, maybe for governments of developing countries, sort of globally, the sort of the trend there in partnerships, ISACA, just when I promoted this particular session, we've got ISACA chapters in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, obviously here across Australia. But, it's good to see sort of an ISACA chapter in Indonesia, for example. Not saying Indonesia is a developing country, but you can see the spread of cybersecurity and the message of cybersecurity and the auditing through chapters and country by country. Any trends there that you're seeing?
Not so much trends, but I would love to answer the question in terms of the top one or two things.
Sorry
about that. So a couple of very key things. One is a perfect asset inventory. It is the entrance point into the world of cybersecurity, and no one gets it well. So a proper asset inventory where you're documenting all of your digital assets, all the different types of data, your RTOs, your RPOs, CI, do it proper. And then do an application level risk assessment is the second thing that I would do. Those two things tell you what you have, and it tells you what your risks are. Because then the third is that you have to align to a framework. Don't care which one. So, whether you, as a smaller organization, go towards something like the CIS Top 20, if you're starting to kind of play into the regulated space, or if you do business with companies or organizations that are regulated, I would look at my industry and I would look at where everybody else is going in terms of a framework, and then pick one and land on that, and then audit against the framework. And those things real quick are the things that are going to tell you where you need to focus, where your critical assets are. And then final is a proper business impact analysis, a real one, so
and actually test it as well, I would imagine, is unplug everything and then try to do business. Or
well, I'll let me delineate between disaster recovery and the business impact. I focus on the BIA because it tells you, if you do it right and you've got your asset inventory right, you've defined your critical business processes, and the applications that fit into those business processes, and if this application is attacked like this, it's going to impact the business process like this, and this is how I recover from that. And those things, that's how you hook in all of and make sure your identity and access management is in place. Make sure that your vulnerability assessment program is in place. Make sure you're logging and all of those things that you should be doing gets hooked in if you do asset inventory, risk assessment, BIA, and then an audit against a framework.
Very good. I think the other thing is, particularly around supply chain now, there's enough discussion on supply chain. So if you're a part of I think, Jenai, you've hit it well in terms of have a look at what other people are doing within your network, or reach out to those industry associations. But otherwise, if you're in a sort of a critical or important supply chain, go talk to your partners, go talk to your client base, because they will help you. If they're bigger and they have an IT team, I'm sure that they will very much help you through that process if they want to uplift your posture.
And I would love to give credit to the entire GRC and cybersecurity industry as a result of the pandemic came together. And I have never in 20 years seen so many people give of their time and their effort to answer questions, to provide help and guidance. And organizations like ISACA, are really there for their members. So I 100%, co-sign what you're saying. Find your local security and GRC groups. People are there to help you.
Great. And otherwise, we'll just plug it. Otherwise, you just go to the MySecurity Marketplace and search in there, and there'll be something in there. So, look, thank you so much, Jenai Marinkovic and John Brandt there in the US. Thank you so much for part 2 of the cybersecurity state of play and a catch up on this particular report. We'll have a link to the report in the show notes, and I think that's already in there. Thank you so much, Jacinta, and great advice there. So appreciate you staying on for the whole episode. And thank you to everyone else there as well. Let me just hide that. Great. Thank you so much, Jenai and John. I'll let you go, and I'll finish off with our reports of the day and another shout out. So a shout out for the ISACA Oceania. Last day to get your tickets. That starts next week. So it's a great lineup, and we'll be there as well. But I've got a slide coming up for that as well. So Jenai and John, I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your evenings there in the US, and have a great weekend as well.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Chris.
See you later. Bye-bye.